Annamie, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Okay, so 6:31, let's get started.
Great, let's do it.
So we have some viewers on YouTube live, which is great. I want to start the evening off by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of Nanaimo First Nations, where we get to work, live, and play. I'm very grateful. And Annamie, I'm going to talk a little bit about who you are.
That
for
sounds
our viewers.
good. Sounds great.
Okay. So,
and also, I guess before we start, let me acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional territories of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. And, you know, I say that with a lot of gratitude.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so Annamie, you have a lengthy list of credentials here. So I haven't got a page, but I'm going to see if I can condense as much as possible here. But I'll start with your education. So for those watching, Annamie has a Master's of Public Affairs at the Princeton University, a Bachelor of Laws at the University of Ottawa, and has been called to the bar in Ontario, which is where you are now, right?
Right.
Perfect. So Annamie has been selected as an inaugural Action Canada Fellow, an Echoing Green Fellow, as a member of the Recruitment of Policy Leaders Program, a member of the University of Ottawa Common Law Honor Society, and as a recipient of the Harry Jerome Award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
A large part of Annamie's professional life has been focused in international affairs. Annamie has worked abroad as a director for a leading conflict prevention NGO in Brussels, as an advisor at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and as a political officer in Canada's mission to the EU. Annamie has co-founded and co-directed BIPHub. Does it go by BIPHub or is it BIPP?
BIP.
Okay,
yeah.
In Barcelona, Spain, and an invention hub for international NGOs working on global challenges. Annamie has also served on the board and advised a number of international NGOs, including the Climate Infrastructure Partnership, also known as CLIP, Higher Education Alliance for Refugees, known as HERE, and Institute for Integrated Transition. After graduate school, Annamie founded and directed the Canadian Centre for Political Leadership, CCPL, from 2001 until 2005, which is a nonpartisan charity that trained women and underrepresented minorities to run for elected office. Some of which are running in elected office now, hey?
That's right. I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, that's something to be proud of. She has volunteered with Operation Black Vote Canada and served on the steering committee for Equal Voice Canada. In the 2019 federal election, Annamie represented the Green Party of Canada as a candidate in the Toronto Centre with the second best Green result in the Greater Toronto Area, nearly tripling the Green vote in the riding. Another thing to be proud of.
Very, very.
Until recently, Annamie served as the International Affairs Critic in the Green Party of Canada's Shadow Cabinet, providing advice to the Green Party's interim leader on international issues and helping to guide the development of foreign policy positions. Annamie speaks English, French, Catalan, and Spanish.
Sí.
I only speak a little bit, so I'm not going to try. But I myself am going to be the host for this evening. So I'm
Wonderful.
Alysia Boudreau. I'm the CEO of the Nanaimo-Ladysmith Electoral District Association. And co-hosting will be, a few people are going to be helping me out in case there's any technical difficulties. And so before we get started with the questions, I'm just going to explain the structure to everyone that's watching on YouTube Live. So as the EDA, we've chosen 6 main questions that we felt were most topical and poignant. And then we also compiled a list of other questions in case, you know, we have more time.
Great.
And also, we're going to be taking questions from the audience in YouTube as well. So we'll have a Q&A period there too, which I have someone helping me with to funnel in questions into the Zoom chat. So I'll be looking periodically for those. And then for closing, there'll just be any final remarks and if you have anything else that you want to say as the candidate.
Sounds great.
And to be clear, for everyone watching too, this is for the Green Party leadership race.
That's right.
So, okay, let's get to the questions here.
I should also mention before the questions that in addition to that, that bio, I have 2 kids. And since the race began, they've both celebrated birthdays. And today is my 24th anniversary with my partner.
Hey!
And, yep. we're celebrating it like this. So,
Yeah. Well,
but
thanks for
it's
doing
been
this on your
24 great years.
anniversary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so first question then. If you don't mind just jumping in after that?
Let's go.
Let's go, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so CERB has been a critical emergency measure to help Canadians weather the COVID-19 pandemic. But some people say it has become a disincentive to low-income Canadians going back to work. How do you see a guaranteed livable income being different? So this is sort of a four-part question. We can break it down as we go, but the second part being, how would you then implement a guaranteed livable income in order to ensure that it is not a disincentive to work? And lastly, what do you see as the main benefits of a guaranteed livable income?
Okay, well, maybe I'll take the first part first and just say that I was a really big fan of guaranteed livable income before the pandemic, and definitely now I'm a true believer. Mostly because, I have probably you, Elon, everyone who's on the I guess this is the YouTube, I don't know, the live stream. We've all had people that have been really profoundly affected during this period, who were in a really precarious position before, and now it's really quite dire. A lot of people who are still falling through the cracks. There's a belief that we have plugged all of the gaps and that everyone is covered by something at this point, and that's really not true. And we see that with students right now, with the lack of summer jobs and with the lack of a proper emergency benefit for them. There are many students that won't be able to go back to school next month. So I believe in something that is universal, that is going to cover people in Canada through a variety of different circumstances in their lives, and that's going to allow them to live in dignity, to make transitions when they need to go back to school when they need to retrain when they need to. I think that is something that is clear that we can offer to people in Canada. So I'm a big fan. That being said, during the last election, we acknowledged, even as we talked about the need for a guaranteed livable income, that it was going to require a great deal of planning, of modeling, of experimentation. What we were saying, what I was saying during the race was, look, we know this is going to be part of the solution in some way or another. Let's sit down with the various levels of government. Let's explore the different models. Let's pilot different models. Let's see what people are doing abroad that has worked. And then let's build a real made in Canada guaranteed livable income. And so that's what I believe. No one has all of the answers of exactly what it would look like. But I will say that one thing that we know it absolutely has to have is some sort of mechanism that allows it to be adjusted by region. And even within sub-regions, within a region, to make sure that it's actually meeting the needs of people in different parts of the country. And we know it needs to be calibrated so that people feel safe and secure, but at the same time, they have the incentive to work if they're able. So those are pending questions. I would say the first thing people should be thinking about is which party is the most supportive, which party has thought about this the longest, and about how they should vote for that party, because absolutely we would have a lot to contribute to that discussion.
Definitely. Thank you for that. That was a good, succinct answer. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Love GLI.
Yeah, love GLI. As a student myself, I very much love GLI.
Yeah.
I could benefit greatly from that. So,
Sure.
Okay. So moving along then, because I feel like we really tied in up that question. So what is your stance on drug prohibition? Do you support decriminalizing or legalizing drugs in Canada? And what approach would you support and why?
Well, let's start again with the last part first and the why. The riding that I ran in the last election is really on this, in this part of the country is absolute ground zero of the opioid epidemic. It has 5 of the 7 safe injection sites in the city. It is, I don't know, again, there's the downtown east side in Vancouver, but they tend to be in a very sad race for who has the worst statistics in terms of deaths. due to poisoning and not overdoses, because it's really a misnomer to talk about overdoses. We're really talking about people who are being poisoned by an unsafe drug supply. And so I saw this every day. You know, one of the first things that I was trained in, and our campaign team had to be trained in, was how to deal with a drug overdose. And we always kept kits in our office because this was something that that we, you know, the whole community really has had to deal with for a long time. So that's the you know, that's the why. It's always important, you know, the experience behind the answer. And so I absolutely believe that the only solution is to decriminalize drugs, decriminalize illicit drugs, what are called illicit drugs, and to ensure a safe supply. It's going to save lives. It's going to destigmatize drug possession and drug usage, which is really, to me, a very important step in ensuring that people get treatment, that we treat it as the health emergency that it is. And then that we also begin to invest in the other services that are necessary. So affordable housing, access to jobs, mental health care services. So yes, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And I was encouraged to see out in BC that the Premier has been asking the federal government and the Prime Minister to decriminalize drugs. We certainly would love to see that in communities across Canada.
Definitely. Yeah. It's for those that are watching from Nanaimo-Ladysmith, it's definitely a topical issue here. It's really like hitting home. There's a lot of that inflicted pain here. So
it really, and maybe just to add one thing more, you know, the pandemic has really, you know, ripped the veil away from a lot of things and really exposed a lot of, you know, things people knew about or we sensed or we had heard about, but really we just can't turn our eyes away from anymore. And one of them is the opioid epidemic, because there has been a very serious spike in overdose, in poisonings primarily during the epidemic. And it's really driven home that you have to be looking at holistic solutions. You can't just give checks to people without giving them somewhere safe to sleep at night, without making sure that they have support services, mental health, and otherwise. You know, it has to be, really have to look at our entire social safety net and make sure that every part of it is working properly.
And I just want to reiterate, I really like that you mentioned poisoning versus overdosing. I think that's a really crucial differentiation there. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on then, more about the pandemic. So Canada's deficit has been growing due to the pandemic. So is this a big problem in your view, Annamie? And some people think that Canada will have no choice but to bring in some form of an austerity bill, some form of austerity measures. So do you think Canada can come out of this pandemic without needing to bring in cuts to programs?
I do. Can I say for sure? Definitely not. You know, we're really in the midst of a grand experiment here, and it is really hard to know exactly how we're going to come out on the other side. You know, our government has essentially, you know, there's a lot of fancy terminology attached to it, but essentially our government is, our central bank is loaning money to its, you know, its own government. So we're essentially printing money to pay our way out of this crisis and to, you know, to pay for all of these emergency benefits that the government has been giving out during the pandemic. And so we're not the only country that's been doing that, by the way. This is something that is happening all over the world. It's something that the central bank in the European Union has been doing. And so we're not the only ones. And so I don't consider, and I don't think any economists have considered that there was an alternative. It was an emergency. It is an emergency. And in an emergency, you do what needs to be done to save lives. And really what we were talking about here with these emergency programs was saving lives. And so you have to look at it like things like the World War II and the investments that were made there. You just do what you have to do in the urgent situation. What we need to be doing though, we're still very far away from that, but as we start to talk about economic recovery and the stimulus that we're going to need to give to the economy in order to emerge from this, this relatively comatose situation, we need to talk about how we're spending that money, because that's when you get into the risk of things like having to impose austerity and whatnot, if the money is not invested wisely. And so for me, what I really want to see is an investment in a green recovery. I want to see a green transition. I want to see us using all of the hundreds of billions of dollars we're going to be spending on things like green infrastructure, investments in renewables, investments in the kind of industries that are going to provide sustainable green jobs for the future. And that's a huge economic opportunity. You know, we could emerge from this with all of the fundamentals in place to actually have more growth in a sustainable way than we have already. And so this is, again, where the Greens are needed, because we understand the urgency, we understand where the investments should be made, and we understand the potential of a green economy as well.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And I would add as well, research and development. Would you agree with?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. This is really the time, you know, we may never have, this is the chance of a lifetime. We may never have an opportunity like this again in the timelines that we have for fighting the climate emergency. You know, we have to remember that we're on a clock. And so even if perhaps later down the road, there may be another opportunity, and I think it's very unlikely, we won't have another opportunity like this in the timelines that we've been given to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so it is so critical what we choose to do with this money over the next couple of years. Again, once we're not in recovery yet, but once we are able to begin the recovery and to begin the stimulus.
Once we're out of the acute phase.
Yes, and you know, it's really important for people to understand that we're still not out of the woods, not at all. You know, it's still an urgent situation. I really don't want to see the government ending benefits this fall. I don't see what the fundamental changes are to the pandemic and the nature of the virus that would allow us to do that. And I'm very concerned about the people who are most vulnerable, you know, low-income people, people in precarious employment, women having to go back to work sooner than they would like to because their benefits have run out, and putting themselves in harm's way when others have the luxury not to have to worry about that.
That's a good point, definitely. Okay, so moving right along. So there has been a critique that many in the renewable energy crowd want to continue the perpetual growth model. So just changing it to green growth. Do you think that we should have an economic growth as the main goal for our economy? And there's another part of this, but I want to just touch on that question first.
Again, one of the things that I hope has become clear to a lot of people in Canada during this pandemic is just that the understanding that growth is not, it's not infinite. And again, as Greens, this is something that we've said for a long time and we understand, but there is no question that growth is not infinite, because the planet has finite resources. And so we need to understand that that has to be baked into our economic system and whatever economic model that we're using. And so, no, I don't believe that whether it's a green economy or the existing economy, that there is any magic formula that is going to allow us to have limitless growth. But there are opportunities for us to have a stable, successful economy that meets the needs of people in Canada and allows us to be good international citizens as well, while at the same time being very respectful of those limits. And I certainly would like to see certain measurements that are not yet included, certain metrics that are not yet included in our economic success. I would like to see those included. I would like to see mental and physical well-being included in our evaluation. I would like to see our stewardship of the biosphere included in our measure of success. And there are others as well, but and I would also, of course, like to see in terms of our budgets, we need to have the climate integrated into that, and the costs related to that integrated as well. So those are, those things have to be kept in mind. And again, when we're talking about a green recovery, being truly green means recognizing the limits of our planet and the limits of growth.
Right, right. And so then I guess the idea wouldn't be necessarily a steady state economy or a planned degrowth, but something that is sort of takes into account the finite resources that we have and works within the parameters.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, we want to see again the central banks, the International Monetary Fund, there are many, Nobel Prize winning economists, et cetera. They've all said that the green economy and the countries that transition towards a green economy the soonest are going to have the most access to what economic growth there is, and that it's a tremendous economic opportunity because this is a global phenomenon that we have not seen since the Industrial Revolution. But that should never be confused with limitless growth. Mm-hmm. We need to continue to be able to provide for people and to have an economy that allows us to have these universal programs. But that absolutely, first, it can't come at the expense of the planet, and definitely we must understand that that cannot include limitless growth.
Okay. So with fossil fuel developments, there's been some Indigenous groups in Canada that have been on the front lines resisting the fossil fuel development within the communities, but others have been embracing it and have even partnered with fossil fuel corps for one reason or another, wanting to buy into big projects. So what should the Green Party of Canada's approach be in regards to respecting Indigenous sovereignty when some nations and groups decide to invest into LNG, oil sands development, or pipelines, etc.?
Yes, and it's an excellent question, and it's a really I know my answer, and it's very important as you become a politician, and I'm not a career politician, but certainly I'm trying to become one, to try to to be as frank as possible and as honest as possible, even if the answer isn't always popular. But what I believe is that sovereignty means sovereignty, and that self-determination means self-determination. And so, it's not when you agree with us that those things apply. And so if there are sovereign nations that have decided to develop resources on their land, to become involved in extractive industries, then just as United States does that, just as France or Denmark or Sweden does that, we have to first respect the sovereignty, and then we negotiate with them, we lobby them, we do all the things that we should be doing in order to get nations to respect and to do their part to reduce greenhouse gases and to fight the climate emergency. But there's no reason that I can think of that we would create an exception in this regard. If we're saying sovereignty means sovereignty, then that's really what it means. And we would just have to deal with that very difficult situation, as it arises. So I certainly wouldn't want to be part of any government that is imposing my will or my vision on sovereign nations. Right.
And it being important that you make the distinction that when that happens, when sovereignty is treated as such, as the definition of sovereignty, that then it's still possible to lobby and to talk to those communities about decisions being made one way or the other.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, it's nation to nation relations. And, we have these kind of negotiations every day with dozens of countries around the world on everything, on trade, on environmental regulations, on health regulations, on international law. And this is what you do. It's messy, it's difficult, but we would never imagine, just as we wouldn't, again, impose our will on Denmark, who's another country that until very recently has been a very big, very heavily invested in fossil fuels. I mean, we can't just impose our will. We have to make a case. We have to get the international community together, and so that's what I would expect us to do here. Because I really, I'm not interested, and I don't think Indigenous peoples are interested in any sort of second-rate sovereignty, and so I don't think that there should be any exceptions to that.
Sovereignty on our terms. Yeah, they're not interested in that.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, in the wake of the death of George Floyd, international protests have called for defunding of the police to address systemic racism and police brutality in general. However, the term defunding the police means different things to different people, as we can see. So do you support, Annamie, the idea of defunding the police in some capacity? And if so...
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, perfect. So, since you do, what would you be calling for as leader of the Green Party of Canada? What would that defunding of the police force look like?
Well, I do, and you're right. Defunding has a lot of definitions. There are a lot of different ideas floating around these days, and I think that's very good and healthy to have that discussion. In my case, when I talk about defunding the police, it's actually part of a larger package of things. And in our campaign, we recently put out a policy briefing note on with proposals on dismantling systemic racism in policing. And so there are 4 parts to it. There is reduce, reallocate, record, and review. Those are the 4 parts. Now, reduce is the first part. That's the defunding. And what we mean by that is that what we should be seeing is a very significant reduction in the policing budgets of the various levels of policing across Canada. The budgets have really exploded over the last 5 to 10 years. They have completely outpaced spending on community and social services, and more activities that really should be done by non-security forces are being given to police services to do. So things, for instance, like monitoring schools or attending wellness checks. So we want to see a reduction and a refocusing of the police on the strict security services that really you need police to provide. And I do believe that such services exist. There are really things that we need police services to fulfill. And then the money that is saved should be reallocated to community and social services that exist wherever possible. And then also to the creation of new emergency response services where necessary. And I'm thinking particularly of mental health services in that case. And then we talk about review. With review, we really want to see far more community oversight of policing. You should not have police investigating police. It has led to almost no convictions of police officers over many years, even for deadly use of force. And so you absolutely need someone outside of the police forces doing that. And then finally, in terms of record, we want to see a national database on incidents of police use of force, whether it's deadly or not, and that's disaggregated by race and gender identities and other identities as well, so that we can really understand the scale of the issue and really tackle it. Because we just have no idea right now. We have no idea what the scale of the problem is. So that's what we're talking about. And I think it's very important to be speaking about all 4 of those things at once. I mean, you can't really talk about defunding the police if you're not going to talk about what comes next. And I would encourage everyone to sign our police use of force petition. It's been sponsored by Elizabeth May, and we have about 2,000 signatures in 2 weeks on that petition. And it will be introduced in the House of Commons, I believe in mid to late September. So there's still another 2 weeks for people to sign, and I hope they will. It's something we can do immediately to make a difference. Having that data is going to make an immediate difference in policing.
So hopefully tech team, whoever is listening, the elusive tech team, maybe we can drop the petition, a link to the petition then in the YouTube comments.
Absolutely.
Something to that effect, so that folks can go and sign that, because that is important. You're right, talking about all of the different parts that come together that make up the meaning of defunding the police.
That's right. That's right. And it's exactly. And it's just action. We need action.
Mhm.
We have so many reports and so many recommendations. I mean, there are so many people who have given this so much careful thought about the future of policing and systemic racism in it. What we've always lacked really is political will and political courage. And so for us in our campaign, what we're most interested in is saying, here are things, if you want to do them, you can do them right now. We're trying to mobilize people around action and putting pressure on the government for immediate action. And so I'm hopeful. I've noticed that there have been some databases that have been introduced over the last couple of months, particularly by municipal policing. And so I'm hopeful that this is actually something that can happen relatively quickly.
So Annamie, I want to ask you to maybe expound on one thing, which is when you talk about accountability coming from outside of the police force, so not police holding police to a certain level, to taking them to task on an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But what would that look like if a community was to try to hold police force accountable? Are we talking like a group of citizens that are chosen that would act as sort of a jury in a sense, or what?
Oh no, not a jury, but really, there are communities and there are municipal policing services across the country that have community oversight boards. They don't all though, and certainly the RCMP, for instance, doesn't have anything like that. So these would be boards of, ideally, when you have them, you have informed citizens, you have people with a certain amount of expertise in the area. And in the cases, and again, it doesn't mean you need to understand the intricacies of policing, but perhaps you're a community activist or you're very connected with communities impacted by, particularly impacted by policing. And then that group, of course, is supported and supplemented by professional technical staff who advise them. And your job really there is to, again, help to set the rules of policing, help to bring a community perspective to policing. And then when there are incidents, to at least be able to assess those incidents. A criminal matter is a criminal matter. And if a police officer assaults someone, that is a criminal matter. And so this is not intended to usurp the criminal justice system. It's just meant for there to be someone that the public can go to and expect relief and expect, how do you say this? Expect credible action and a credible assessment of the complaint, which simply is not going to happen and has not happened in the current system where you have police investigating police.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And that has largely been contributing to the dissatisfaction that people are having. Okay, so we have a question from the YouTube chat here that I just got. So from Michael, hello Annamie. First, thank you for running. That's fine. Can you identify half a dozen important initiatives that you will push for in decarbonizing our economy?
I have a bunch, but I feel like we're going to be, you know what, I'll say stay tuned. I'm going to give you some teasers, since you tuned in tonight and, you're spending time with us, I'll give you some teasers. In terms of, the question specifically is deep decarbonization.
Yes.
So we talked about some of those things already, right? We talked about the need to invest in research and development. We talked about, well, maybe I'll say some things again then, or maybe it's the first time. It's later here, it's 10 here. So if I'm repeating myself, I apologize.
Some leeway.
Yeah, thank you. So certainly infrastructure is one of those things that we want to see. Again, these hundreds of billions of dollars that we're going to be spending. There are things that the public, that the government, that public funds are going to be able to do that simply will not be possible with private funds. And so if we're talking, for instance, about a national electricity grid, that's the kind of thing that I would want to see us investing in, because again, we may not ever have that opportunity again, because it does cost a lot. I would also, so I guess as a theme then, I want to see us investing in the big public infrastructure projects that would really support a transition to a green economy. I also want to see us, so that's 2. I also want to see us retrofitting. You know, again, these things don't sound sexy when you say them, but when you think about it's true, you know,
Yeah.
it's true, but it is important. When you think about the percentage of greenhouse gas emissions that are generated by buildings, you realize that if we are going to do this deep decarbonization, we absolutely have to be doing deep retrofits as well. And so that's also something that I would want to see. And that would really involve the public and the private sector. There's a lot that the public sector can do to incentivize a private market for that kind of work. So that's another one. I also want to see us investing in renewables. I'm trying to keep that's for investing.
That's four so far.
That's four. I want to see us investing in renewables as well. You know, they have come so far so quickly in terms of their competitiveness with fossil fuels, and in many cases they're cheaper, and they can get cheaper still. And so that is absolutely something that we have the existing, we have wind technology and solar technology, but there are many other renewable technologies that we should be looking at. I also want to see us really getting behind the carbon pricing in the way that we should, particularly carbon tax and rebate. Because again, economists, there is a global consensus amongst economists, whether it's the IMF or the World Bank, or, there was a Nobel Prize winning economists, there were 3,000 of them that signed a statement saying that a carbon tax is the #1 thing, the most cost-effective thing that we can do to deeply decarbonize as quickly as possible. And so that definitely has to be part of it, but that means that we need to commit to raising the carbon tax until we get to where we need to go. And that's not $300 like the conservatives said. We're talking more in the range of 100. There are a couple more, but we're going to be talking about those in the next couple.
I feel like those are sufficient in that they paint sort of a broad picture. Yes. So that's Thank
and
you.
I know this is one of these things I'm agreeing, right? So you got me talking on these.
Yeah, what else do you want to hear?
you can wave your hand if I'm prattling on too long, but this is something, again, it's very important to have the answer to that question, because really, if we're lucky enough to have an effective treatment for the virus, for the coronavirus, let's say in early 2021, then we need to be able to just completely turn on a dime and get the economy going, stimulate it, and know exactly where we're going to spend that money. And the #1 thing we should be spending it on is that deep decarbonization and the climate emergency. So we do need to have the answer to that question. So it's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you, Michael. And Annamie, this is sort of off the cuff, but something I'm thinking about. Because of the pandemic, do you think that it's been hurting the green economy? I would say the green sector of the economy more, less so than we can say the non-regenerative fossil fuel development or traditional forms of pockets of the economy?
That is an excellent question, and I don't know the answer off the top, other than to what I've read. And the anecdotal, which is, I know that there has been a lot of expressions of disappointment in how much money the government has allocated to that sector. The federal government put together very quickly an emergency plan for the fossil fuel sector that involved loans, no interest loans and grants and guarantees and all sorts of things to keep that sector going. And I know that there's disappointment that there hasn't been that same sort of support for renewables. There is no question that we have underinvested in that sector. And again, it's a pity, because for every dollar invested in that sector, you're going to generate far more revenue for the economy and create more jobs. So we're doing this strange double down on industries that are in an irreversible decline. And so I can't imagine, again, without those supports, that the industry hasn't been damaged. But at the same time, again, I'm trying to remain hopeful And I want to believe that when we do come to spend this big pot of money in the recovery period, that a lot of it is going to be invested in renewables. And again, having a lot of Greens at the table when those decisions are being made makes that a lot more likely.
We can stay hopeful.
Yeah. Yes. And work toward it again. You know, this is such an important time for Greens to be raising their voices, and even in the middle of this very urgent situation, really making sure that people remember that, you know, the climate emergency has not taken a pause. You know, it hasn't forgotten us, so we can't forget it. And really making sure that, you know, we have this almost a stewardship of this in this role. As the champions and the voice on behalf of the climate and the future. And so we really have to be making sure that that is never forgotten, even now.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have another question from Sig. So is it too late to ask how we can move forward with proportional representation?
No, never. I know that BC has been, a lot of people have had their hearts broken in BC. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's very heartbreaking. And I know that there is a narrative, and certainly those who don't want to see proportional representation feed a narrative that, oh, this is settled for a generation. This is done for a generation. But I believe that there was never really enough political will put behind it. And when referendums work, when major structural changes like proportional representation come in, it's because they're really supported by the political class, not just civil society. And there wasn't really that in BC or in the other provinces that have looked at proportional representation. So I definitely don't think that it is something that has to be put away. I believe that more than ever, the Greens have to, again, maintain that traditional role of being the champions of proportional representation. It's one of our values in any case, one of our core values. And so we can't really abandon it. And it's just, again, it's needed more than ever. And I'm hopeful that people in Canada have seen throughout the pandemic how important cooperation and collaboration and just a diversity of voices has been in terms of helping us to deal very quickly with the pandemic. And I do believe that that's going to give us new avenues of opportunity to effectively lobby on behalf of that issue. And so no, I think that it's something that we should keep reintroducing. And I do believe that a lot has changed in the last few months that makes it more possible that people in Canada would be receptive to it.
Okay, so those of you that want proportional representation, there's still a chance.
Absolutely. There's always hope. There's always hope.
Not too late. Yeah. Definitely.
Well, you know, in that respect, having a lot of global experience really helps, because I've seen, whether it's things like this, whether it's changes to the electoral system, changes to the way that the National Assembly works, whether it's peace negotiations, whether ending deadly conflict. I have just seen many situations where people never imagined that change was possible, that they thought it wouldn't happen for another generation or two. And then it does, circumstances change, things align, and things change. And so, those who want the change have to continue to keep the discussion going so that when that opportunity comes, that you can actually take advantage of it. So definitely there is hope.
Okay. So another one, we can keep having them come in, which is great. So Sharon asks, Annamie, what's your stand on electoral reform, which could provide the underpinning for a lot of other changes? So we just spoke about electoral reform, but maybe more so you can talk about, or I guess expand on the experience you've had being in different countries that have gone through electoral reform and what you think that would maybe look like for Canada if it.
Yeah. Well, not so much electoral reform as I would say deliberative democracy processes, where they've had, again, a very fundamental change that they're looking to make, something that's either very structural or a big societal issue. For instance, in Ireland, they had two deliberative democratic processes, one around equal marriage and another one around abortion. And so, I've seen those unfold, and some of the things that worked really well and some of the things that didn't. But every country is different, and so it's very good to have those comparative examples, but not all of it is going to fit here. So in terms of electoral reform, I really want to see democratic renewal. Someone who, a lot of my studies and particularly my work when I was leading the organization, helping to increase the representation of various underrepresented groups, a lot of it looked at what kind of systems would support more diversity. And there's no question that proportional representation does that. A lot of the voter apathy, and I call it voter apathy because it's not general apathy. It's really people who they're not going to be bamboozled anymore. They understand that the system is designed in a way so that their vote is undervalued, many of them, and so you disengage. And so I want to see that change. And so, yes, I want to see us have a system with citizens assembly and then votes in parliament that are going to bring in the democratic reform that we need as quickly as possible.
So you said something to the effect of a citizens assembly. So would you be in favor of a sort of model, some iteration of participatory democracy as well?
When you say participatory democracy,
yeah, so it being a body of voters.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what I was calling deliberative democracy.
Okay, perfect.
Participatory democracy. Yes, the thing that I want to make sure, on the one hand, we want to make sure that this is actually done. On the other hand, we also want to make sure that it really gets embedded into society, into the culture, and so that if the government changes, they don't say, well, look, this was the idea of the last government. Maybe they had a mandate for that, but we didn't agree, and we don't, wasn't part of what we ran on, and so we're just going to overturn it. We want to make sure that there is enough of an indication of of the will of the people, so that it becomes very hard to do that.
Almost more of an
exactly, yeah. And so since we wouldn't have a referendum, because we've seen how those can be gamed, then we really have to be looking at something that allows the public to make it clear that this is something that they want, that they support very strongly, so that it becomes really irreversible, even if we have, the government changes. So, yeah. Right. And I believe that fair vote, that's something that they support as well. I know that there is the temptation to go straight to, parliament legislation, a vote. But again, you want to make sure that it's a permanent change, given how important it is.
Right, right. So it's got a strong backing, and the architecture around it is built to last.
Yeah, and that there's some education as well. There's not a lot of civic education, unfortunately. This is a change that people need to understand. And again, there wasn't enough of that done in the various provinces in many instances because there was a lack of political will. But this is again a fantastic opportunity to educate multiple generations of voters about the importance of these kind of electoral reform and democratic renewal. And so, I wouldn't want to pass up on that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have another question that the EDA compiled here, so I'm going to pull from that.
Okay.
What do you see as the most important foreign policy issues facing Canada today, and what are your positions on these issues?
The most important foreign policy issue facing us is the climate emergency. It's an existential threat, and we have a very short window of time to deal with it. And it is also a threat that can only be dealt with at the global level, right? It's something that no one country on their own can solve. And so it requires statesmanship, statecraft, as we call it. And, it's really where Canada should be a leader, and we have not been a leader in that area. And so I would, as the Prime Minister, what I would want to see is us assuming that leadership role. And that begins at home. It first begins here with us and setting targets that are aligned with the science, setting a proper budget, a proper carbon budget, so that we know what's going in and coming out, and we have something to measure, baselines to measure against, a real timeline, and a real plan for implementation as well. And then when we do that, it gives us, again, the credibility to go out and to help countries who may struggle more with that, and to convene the international community on behalf of the planet. So, I mean, in terms of my top foreign policy, I mean, all of these things are interconnected, of course. The climate emergency has caused it's caused wars. It provoked the war in Syria to a large extent. It's caused massive displacement. It creates a much more fragile world in general. And so it has to be the top. If I only pick one, it would have to be that, because it connects to everything else and it's the most urgent.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that it really is, excuse me, the apex of all of the issues, and everything. Yeah. Everything is interconnected in that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have another question from Lynn. Sorry, that's my phone going off. How rude. So Lynn says, "Hi, Annamie. Thank you for stepping up. Do you have a strategy for dealing with aggressive attacks designed to undermine, discredit, and intimidate you?" So this is a little bit more of a personal question.
Okay. Before I answer that, I'm going to put on a little lip balm, because I'm under studio lights, and I feel like I can feel all of the moisture being sucked out of my body.
Okay, we'll take a quick self-care moment.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. A little lip balm, a little water,
a little soda stream.
Exactly. People should see, right? This is what this is what it looks like.
This is real.
This is the glamour behind politics right here. Oh.
Well, thanks for letting us in to that moment.
Yes, exactly. I can only lick my lips so much. So in terms of that question, do I have a strategy for dealing with the attacks? First, I will say that I was and continue to be taken aback by the intensity of the attacks, and I would also say the consistency and the regularity of the attacks. And so I don't know, you never become accustomed to it, really. It's just one of those things. But I actually wrote an article not that long ago, an op-ed, along with my sons, about our experience with that and what we were doing. And really, I've tried to use it as much for myself and for my sons as a teaching moment. We had to decide a very long time ago, just because of the skin that we were born in and the identities that we had, whether we were going to respond to these things with hate, with anger, and let it really consume us and embitter us, or if we were going to try to do what we could to educate people wherever possible. And that's not always possible, but it's more possible more often than people think. Where it's not possible, then we resist. We will not allow ourselves to be silenced. We'll organize to resist if necessary. But first, we really try to educate. We try to enter the situation with at least the possibility of understanding. And that's basically how we've seen ourselves through this. And, it's ongoing. It's a pity. And I'm hoping that just being in the race and some of the attention that's being drawn to some of these incidents first, it will help other people who've experienced it, but also begin a very necessary conversation, just in general in politics, about what it's like for people who aren't that represented to run, and can make it a more inviting place and a hostile environment. So
definitely.
Great question. Thank you, Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. Okay, so Annamie, we have 5 minutes left, but I think this might be the last question.
Okay.
I think we'll go with that, because it's got a few parts to it.
Okay.
So this is another one from one of our members of the EDA. So there are many remote Indigenous communities in Canada that have had their water sources polluted by industry. Many of these communities have been living with boil water advisories for years. Do you think fixing this situation should be a priority for the Canadian government? And if so, how would you propose to guarantee access to clean and safe drinking water for all Canadians?
It's a very good question, and I always think when I hear it, what a pity it is that it still has to be asked. There's no question that water is a fundamental human right. It's being recognized as such by every imaginable type of international body, and of course the United Nations. And so for a country, let's say the country known as Canada, but for the territories that we're living in, for anyone to be without such a basic necessity, there's simply no excuse for it at all. In terms of what can be done, I really believe at this stage, the only thing that is going to work is Indigenous self-determination, and to have far more Indigenous peoples simply in control of the agencies and the tools of government that can act, because it's not coming from anywhere else. We have had a succession of liberal and conservative governments stretching back, all through the horizon, and they have never had the political will. And I will include NDP governments as well in that. And so, we have so many leaders in the communities that are directly impacted by these kind of injustices. There's no need for intermediaries anymore. There's no need for agents or people to speak or act on their behalves. It's really about it's really about making space for the people who can lead and to get the action done. And so I think that's it. I wouldn't even try to list the actual actions. I would just say, let Indigenous peoples lead on behalf of their communities and take the action that is necessary. Recognize the right to self-determination, and the existing sovereignty. It's not something for anyone to give back. It's just there. And let's see, let's see if that makes a difference. We've tried all the other things. Let's see how the people who have the most to gain or lose, let's see how they do.
And and the folks that are experiencing it.
And that's exactly it. That is exactly it. Yeah.
So I lied because I said that was the last question, but I want to make sure that we hit all of the different demographics. And I feel like I would be totally remiss if I left out a question for the youth.
Okay.
For the youth.
The youth.
So, the youth.
Yeah.
So some people are worried that teenagers are too irresponsible and unrealistic to have that responsibility. So on reducing the voting age, that's what we're talking about. Sorry. So because the Green Party has a policy to reduce the voting age, what are your thoughts on the issue?
Well, I don't think anything magic happens when people turn 18. I think that the main thing that we need to consider is, are young people getting access to the civic education that they need to be informed voters. And that applies really to all of us. There's been a real lack of investment in civic education. Organizations like Operation Black Vote are trying to change that, and a lot of different communities have those kind of civic engagement organizations for young people. And so that is what I want to see. I want to see, we know that when young people get the vote, when they get access to it earlier on, that they're able, they become voters for life. They're much more likely to vote for life. And so that's something we want to encourage, but I want to see it accompanied absolutely by a massive civic education program, not just for them, but for all of us, because really it's been decades since we've had a proper civic education program in this country.
Mm-hmm. When you were volunteering with Operation Black Vote Canada, was that organization going into high schools and teaching civics?
It does. It has all kinds of programs related to civic education. And, I'm still involved with Operation Black Vote Canada, not during the campaign, but myself and the chair of Operation Black Vote we co-created, co-founded a fellowship called the 1834 Fellowship, which is training a whole new generation of young Black public policy leaders. It's an intensive one-year program, fellowship program. And that launched earlier this year, and it has funding for a couple of years. So yes, this is something that I care deeply about. But yes, I mean, it's a pity that Operation Black Vote Canada, Canadian Muslim Vote, and there are many other organizations, Equal Voice. It's a pity that those organizations have to be a substitute for the work that the provincial and federal government should be doing in terms of helping to create informed citizens. And when we don't create informed citizens and voters, to me, it's a form of voter suppression. And so absolutely, it's wonderful to have civil society as a complement, but I really want to see a proper education system at the, offered by the various levels of government.
Okay. Well, Annamie, I want to say thank you. I took 1 minute extra of your time. So
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. It's been great talking to you, and the questions have been excellent. So I appreciate the chance to answer them.
Well, yeah, we have a competent, caring, and involved group of constituents here, and especially on the EDA, we care greatly. And so we took a lot of time to make sure that we had good, well-rounded questions. But lastly, I want to just let people know that are watching that this will be on YouTube, and people can share this with friends who didn't get to tune in to watch it live. So it didn't go anywhere. It didn't go up into the cloud. It'll stay. And that we have meet and greets with up and coming Green Party leadership candidates as well. So stay tuned for those dates. Email.
And maybe just one shout out, of course, I really want to say hello to Paul Manley. And, congratulate all of you on having that representation, and also to encourage everyone to sign our Emancipation Day petition. Paul Manley sponsored that petition, and this is a petition to get Emancipation Day, which is the day that slavery was abolished across the British Empire, recognized finally in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're at about somewhere between 2,000 and 2,100 signatures over the course of the last 10 days or so. And it's only open for, I think, again, another 2 or 3 weeks. So please sign that, and we'll all be really proud when Paul presents it in the House in September.
Okay. Good job, Paul. Good job, Annamie.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, great. So let's wrap it up. That was awesome. Thanks so much, Annamie, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for tuning in.